Hi, I'm Reverend Jake Zabe, and welcome to Children's Bible Stories. Alright children, our Bible story today is going to be the birth of Moses. So at the end of the book of Genesis, the Israelites had moved into the land of Egypt because Joseph was the prime minister of Egypt and the Israelites were well loved by Pharaoh. Now the book of Exodus starts off by stating that there arose a new king, a new Pharaoh in Egypt who hated the Israelites. He feared them. Now, it's believed by some scholars that the reason why he feared the Israelites is because at this particular time in history, the Egyptians had just overthrown the Hyksos dynasty. And the Hyksos dynasty were people who had come from the land of Canaan who had managed to get control of the government of Egypt. And the dynasty that was now ruling in Egypt was the first Egyptian dynasty after the Hyksos had just been exiled from Egypt. And since the Hyksos, like the Israelites, had come from the land of Canaan, this meant the Egyptians were now very suspicious of all the Israelites. Now the Pharaoh became very harsh on the Israelites, and he set above them taskmasters and made them work as slaves to build the store cities of Pithom and Ramses. But the more the Pharaoh oppressed them, the more God multiplied the Israelites. And so he began to fear them even more and said, I have a plan. We need to kill all the baby boys in Israel so that they won't be able to multiply. Now the reason he wanted to kill the baby boys is because the inheritance is passed down through the males. And so if there's only Israelite girls around, they would all be forced to marry Egyptian men, and that inheritance would then be passed on to the Egyptians. So his plan was to kill all the baby boys. Now the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, had commanded the midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, that they were to go and be the midwives for the Hebrew women, and that whenever they gave birth, the midwives were to check the baby, and if it was a girl, they were to let it live, but if it was a boy, they were to kill it. But the Israelites kept multiplying, because Shiphrah and Puah were faithful to God and they were not killing the baby boys. And then Pharaoh brought them before him and said, why are all these baby boys getting away? Why are you not doing your job? And the women said, oh, that you don't understand, Pharaoh. These Israelite women, they're not like the Egyptian women. Because they work so hard out in the field, when it comes time to give birth, they just have babies so quickly that they have babies before the midwives can even get there. And Pharaoh's like, well, I am Pharaoh and I don't know much about babies and giving birth to babies, so I'm assuming you're telling the truth. They weren't actually telling the truth, they were lying. But they were lying to save the Hebrew babies. And because of that though, because the Israelites kept multiplying and they kept having so many baby boys, Pharaoh made a new law. And he said, every Hebrew boy that is born is to be cast into the Nile River. And that meant they'd all drown or be eaten by crocodiles. Now, there was a faithful, believing Israelite couple from the tribe of Levi, and their names were Amram and Jochebed. And they had a daughter named Miriam and a son named Aaron. And then one day, they had another baby. This would become baby Moses, but he wasn't yet named. We're not told what his Hebrew name was. Moses is actually the name that the princess will give him. But they gave birth to this baby. But Pharaoh had given his decree that all the baby boys should be thrown into the Nile River. And so Moses' mother, Jochebed, she had fed the child and kept him hidden for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she decided that she was going to put him in the Nile River in a little boat. So Jochebed made a little boat, a little ark, and she covered it in bitumen to make it waterproof. And she put baby Moses in there and hid him in the bulrushes. Now this was actually fairly clever from Jochebed, because she was technically obeying the demands of the government. Pharaoh said that all the baby boys had to be put in the Nile River. And technically, baby Moses was put in the river. But nothing said that he couldn't be inside a boat. And so Jochebed left baby Moses in the river, and she went away to go do her daily work. But Moses' older sister Miriam, she stayed by, hidden behind a bush, keeping an eye on baby Moses. But what happened on that day is that Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, came down with her servant girls down to the river to have a bath. And so the princess went down to the river, and she was having a bath and just washing in the river, and her servant girls were sitting there probably helping her wash or just keeping an eye out that no men were walking by to see the princess naked while she was having a bath. And while this was happening, baby Moses was crying. Wah! 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 And the princess like, what was that? That sounds like a baby crying. Servant girl, go find what's happening. And so the servant girl went off, and she found the box, and she brought it to the princess. And the princess opened it and said, huh, it's one of those Hebrew babies. What's he doing here? And at that moment, Miriam came running in, and she said to the princess, Princess, do you want me to go get a wet nurse for you? So a wet nurse is that in cases, particularly in the royals, they didn't breastfeed their own babies. They would normally get some kind of a servant girl, a wet nurse, who would do the feeding for them. And particularly in this case, since Moses was adopted by the princess, she wouldn't be able to feed baby Moses, so she needed a wet nurse to feed him instead. And so the princess thought, yeah, okay, go get me a wet nurse. And Miriam ran off, and she grabbed their mother, Jochebed, Moses' own mother, and said, here you go, princess, I've got you a wet nurse. And the princess said, oh, thank you so much. All right, this is my baby now. I've adopted him. I'm going to look after him. But you're going to feed him for me and take care of him for me until he's weaned, and then I'll have him back, okay? And don't worry, I'll pay you for the whole thing. And so Moses' mummy got to look after baby Moses and raise him and feed him and take care of him until he was weaned and was big enough to go off and live with the princess for the rest of his life. And so normally babies would be weaned about the age of 2. And so Moses' mummy had originally hidden him for 3 months and then put him in the water, and the princess found him. And now she got to look after him for like another 2 years before she gave baby Moses off to the princess. And when the princess got baby Moses, she said, I shall name him Moses, for I drew him out of the water. Now the name Moses is a very interesting name, because in Hebrew it sounds like the word Moshe, which means to draw something out of water. But the name Moses in Egyptian also means son. Like Pharaoh Thutmose is the son of Thoth, and Ramses is the son of Ra. And so Moses means both son in Egyptian, which is probably why the princess wanted to call him Moses, but it also means drawn out. in Hebrew, because Moses was drawn out of the Nile River. And so that's our Bible story for today, children. I hope you've enjoyed this story. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye, and God bless.